I'm very excited to be hosting this conversation at Games for Change, partly because I think in some ways this session is a hint at the future of where Games for Change is going. I think that when Games for Change started 15 years ago, and it's fun being here after 15 years, I see Suzanne over there. This is a neat opportunity to reflect on how far things changed. At the beginning, there was such an emphasis on video games, and that's where really we felt like we were. I think PokémonGO opened so many people up to the idea that games in cities aren't just sports. Aren't just our parks. Of course, there is massive play infrastructure in our cities already, and in fact, there's a lot of enthusiasm for things like local sports teams. So sociologists would already tell us that play and sport are in our cities in incredibly huge and important ways. But it was only just starting to intersect with the digital. And I think PokémonGO opened so many people's eyes to that possibility. And I think that what was interesting in what we're going to be talking about today is that even a year after the peak, when a lot of people I would talk to would say, PokémonGO, is that how many people are still playing that, right? Well, it turns out millions of people are still logging in every month. There actually is a pretty large player base that is still active. And this is a session where we're going to be talking a little bit about a collaboration between several cities, the company Niantic that's behind PokémonGO, and the Knight Foundation, which was often in the cities, although not all of them. So this is most people make the keynote? Just a quick show of hands if you heard the keynote. Okay, so almost everyone did, and you got to hear a little bit about what was happening with Knight and with Niantic. I heard about it actually with some of the press releases they were putting out about this new partnership and what they were going to do in Charlotte. And I reached out to them and I said, this is fascinating, and I'm actually writing a book around cities and how games can connect neighbors and make people connected to their city and to each other and to local history. I said, I'd love to learn a little bit more what you're doing. So I got on the phone, I was interviewing them, and next thing I know, I was saying, well, if you want me to investigate your other cities and follow up, and they said, oh, that'd be great. And so this led to a small grant to follow and track what a number of these different city experiments were doing. Ultimately, we tracked about 5 cities and what they were doing, and the cities were doing incredible things pretty much on their own. So I wasn't involved in any of the design work in the cities. Rather, like my team, and Aubrey Hill is here as well at American University. I'm on the faculty there. Aubrey and I traveled to several of the cities. We were observing what was happening. We ran surveys in some of them, interviewing players and about their experiences. We did a lot of interviews with the city stakeholders and people in city government who are doing these projects as well. And I think if I were to offer one little preview, and you can read more about this online, we're releasing our report as a white paper today. It's about a 35-page report that goes into this. Some tracks the economic indicators, but a lot of it is about the social side. But I do want to say that this is not just about what happens when Pokemon is in cities. This is really about what happens when cities take PokémonGO and do something with it. The cities didn't just say, you're welcome to come, players. No, these cities actually did a lot of work to what I would even go so far as to say remixing the game. In some cases, there was a new game layer that was added to PokémonGO, where the experience might be something like a treasure hunt in a city. There might be something like a neighborhood tour, and gave not only a different structure, sometimes even different game mechanics to what's going on with the game in that city. And through this additional layer of design, the cities brought the game into alignment with some of their own campaigns, goals, and events. And I think this is really what's, I think, interesting, because cities can have an active role in taking massive mega platforms like PokémonGO and adapting and aligning it with what they're doing locally. So that's a little of what the report looks like. And of course, this is partly my advertising for the report. We have some printed copies over here as well. But I think that you can't hear it better than from some of the people who were there doing this actual organizing, planning, theorizing, thinking through. These really, in some ways, are experiments. And that's one of the things I was excited about, was that even when talking with Knight and Niantic, both of them said, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. And I think what you'll hear in some of the stories from the different cities is that they didn't necessarily know either. They may have changed strategy in fairly significant ways along the way as they were going. You'll also hear that the cities are pretty different. What happened in San Jose when there were around 30,000 players turning out and engaging? Very different than Philadelphia with neighborhood libraries. Very different than in Boston, where young people were both being creative in describing the neighborhood locations they cared about, but also bringing their voices in and trying to tell some of the local history in their own words, with their own writing. So that's a little of a preview for what you're going to hear on this panel. We're going to have each of the city speakers talk for a few minutes. We're going to go pretty quickly about what happened in their city, and then we're going to have a conversation that cuts across and said, well, what lessons can we learn by looking across these cities with some of the themes about what's the future of cities and augmented reality platforms? What can we learn, including with things around like fan culture, which is obviously an important critical thing with Pokemon Go as well. Any additional words of introduction that anyone would like to add from the panel? All right. Well, with that then, let's turn it over to Eddy, and we'll go to the Free Library of Philadelphia. Is that or did we had originally said we were going to start with San Jose, I think, actually. Let's just check what the next slide is. That's my slide. I'm going to skip that because I think that we just talked through it. Let's go to Viva Calle. Is that okay to go there directly?
Absolutely. Can everybody hear me? All right, wake up, come on. It's almost lunchtime. All right, we're gonna have fun. So Viva Calle San Jose is San Jose's Open Street program. If you've never had the opportunity to visit Open Street, it is an amazing experience. I believe every town should have one. And so last year we closed down 7.3 miles of city streets, car-free. We towed all the cars. Streets are only open to non-motorized transportation, so you can walk it, bike it, run it, roller skate it if you're crazy enough. Some people did it. And last year we were very fortunate to partner with Niantic, the makers of Pokemon Go, to talk about how to integrate the program or to the game within our Open Streets concept. A couple things you have to know about me. I'm old. I've never heard of Pokemon Go in my life until we started this partnership. So I called my young millennial, Zach Mendez, and I said, you need to come up to this meeting because I have no idea what they're talking about. And Zach is a crazy Pokemon player. And so one of the things, from looking at it from the inside out, somebody who doesn't know about the game, the first thing is I said, I want to go big. I want you guys to turn the knob up to 10. And they said, well, we're going to turn it up to 2. How's that? So it's ridiculous. And they're like, you don't know what you're asking for. And so over the process of about 4 months, we sat with their team and we talked about how to create a great individual Pokemon experience for people during Viva Calles. One of the things we wanted to do was far-fetched. So again, I never knew what that meant. San Jose has one of 3 Japantowns left in America, and so I wanted the far-fetched character from Japan to spawn in Japantown. So you're insane. We're not going to do that. You guys will get destroyed. Again, I didn't understand what they were talking about. I didn't know how many people would show up. And so we took it down a level. We only had 10 days to market the Pokemon Go part of Viva Calles because we were still going through fine-tuning the Pokestops and how the activation would work. Within our game, we had folks trying to get end-to-end. We didn't want them just to congregate in one area. We wanted them to move throughout the 7 miles. So we had an end-to-end challenge where they would find things along the route, and then they would get a special prize at the end. I arrived in Japantown at 4 o'clock in the morning to make sure that all the cars were towed, and I saw literally 5 or 6 people with their phones looking down. And I said, hey, are you guys here for Viva Calles? They're like, no, we're here for Pokemon. I was like, wow. They're like, when does it turn on? I said at 10, like it says on the website, which crashed the day before. So just know that whatever server you're serving, it's not going to be big enough for Pokemon Go. So we had 10 days to market. We got the word out. Our server crashed 2 days ahead of time. We had 35,000 individual people logged on that day of Viva Calles. We had 130,000 people come for the event. 35,000 were Pokemon players. It was amazing. We did learn a lot of lessons. Again, I learned you don't never want to turn the knob up to 10. So any of you are taking notes out there, right? 2 is the appropriate amount. And again, with 10 days of marketing, we had a very massive turnout of folks. In some places, it was literally a human congestion traffic jam. If you look to the very top, that picture is Japantown. And that is at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The program starts at 10. So people came and they stayed a very long time. We had over 1 million Pokemon caught within the hours from 10 to 3 p.m. If you ask people, was it a success? Just on a sheer numbers, absolutely. If you ask people who are walking and biking, they might say, you know, it wasn't that great because there are a lot of people looking at their phones, not looking at the streets. We did learn some lessons, and I think we'll cover that a little bit later, but by and large, any type of public space activation or programming that you can do to incorporate Pokemon Go, you should definitely do it. There's just a million different ways you can create positive outcomes from this type of partnership. But we were very pleased, and we're going to be partnering with them again this September. So we'll pass it over.
Excellent. Yes. Let's see. So next, let's turn and give you a contrasting story with the Free Library System of Philadelphia.
So I'm Eddy with the Free Library of Philadelphia, and last year we were approached by the program officer for Night in Philadelphia, who asked us if the library would be interested in partnering with Niantic to do some Pokemon programming in our libraries over the course of the summer and tied into our summer reading program. So we identified 5 locations. There are 54 libraries throughout Philadelphia. We identified 5 locations to pilot this, and we came at it thinking that this would be a really quick experiment for the library and trying to better understand if this type of engagement with technology would bring in new users to the library. So there were 3 points that we were trying to establish, and that was around engagement, that was around directing people, and also attracting new audiences. So in the course of about 2 months, we built out this program. We piloted 5 locations, and the library served as a hub in the communities. And we tried to attract people through Pokemon, not only to our libraries, but also to engage deeper within their communities around the libraries. Each of the librarians in the locations identified neighborhood assets and created the neighborhood maps that you can see up there that would lead players through the neighborhood towards murals, towards points of interest, towards our parks, and then hopefully come back to the library and engage with us in deeper ways. Pictured above is a librarian from our Queen Memorial branch, which is in Point Breeze, Philadelphia. It's a high poverty area of Philadelphia. And one of the things we were concerned with in piloting this game was not all of our existing users have access to smartphone technology and also the data plans. So we tried to create some print materials for kids to also play the game if they did not have these phones, and I think that was really successful on our part. In terms of attracting new users, that was a big question mark for us. We were not sure whether we were deeply engaging with new audiences. Part of the partnership with Niantic, we were hoping that they'd be able to share aggregate data with us around the people logging in, playing the game in and around the libraries. We never got that data from Niantic, so we weren't really able to understand how many people were actually engaging with the game at our libraries, going on the poke crawls, and to the various stops. My belief is there were a lot of soft touches, so people were around our buildings, outside of our buildings, playing, but really did not engage deeper with the library. In terms of our existing users, our existing audiences, if anyone's ever been into a library during the summer, you know it's full of kids. And these kids definitely, I think, grabbed onto the game, whether via their phones or using their maps. And the staff in the buildings did a great job programming around Pokemon for these kids, whether it was via crafts or like drawing their favorite Pokemon characters, or actually leading groups of the kids through the neighborhoods. It allowed them to better deeply engage. What's the other point I'm missing? And then the last part that we were trying to really better understand was whether this would be a good vehicle for directing people into the community. I think that was a success for us, but again, understanding whether new audiences were coming to libraries and using us in new and different ways, or if it was just existing users, that remains the wild card for us. Yeah.
We'll definitely have questions after, so unless if it's a clarifying question on what was just said.
Yeah, it's a clarifying question. So is there anything you change on the mechanics of the games, or is it only the trajectory that you have set out for in this game? You understand my question?
Like, did you add any locations to the game, for instance?
Yeah, or the game principles that
The game as it is, I didn't mention this, so one of the ideas that we had was we were going to ask Niantic to drop lures into our libraries during specific programs that were happening, thinking that would be a way to bring new audiences into our buildings, not only engage with the game, but also engage with the programming that we are having. And from the Niantic side, they were never able to deliver on the lure aspect. So we don't know if that would have worked or not worked.
All right, so then let's move on to a little of youth, we've titled Youth Participatory PokémonGO and AR Stories. Eric, do you want to talk a little about what you did there?
Sure, I could talk about that. So my name is Eric Gordon. I'm different than the other people on the panel in that I'm coming from a university, not from the city. And we also, our project was not directly connected with Night. It was a direct relationship with Niantic. And it was also differently conceived in that we started off this project, instead of thinking about Pokemon as a lure, as a way of getting people out, we actually started with the problem of absence, in the sense that we were looking at where Poke deserts are in the city, and we don't have perfect data on that, but we were fairly certain that there are Poke deserts that not surprisingly aligned with other kinds of deserts, like information deserts, food deserts, other sorts of economic indicators. And so we thought, so we set out to do a project that would, at first, we thought we wanted to populate those deserts, and we wanted to involve young people specifically to be able to propose new locations of Pokestops in the city. And we specifically wanted to involve young people of color in the city, which is the neighborhoods that were directly impacted. And so one of the challenges that we had with our project is that we didn't want just every Pokemon player. We didn't want 30,000 Pokemon players because we wanted to target specific populations, which was difficult. And we were also thinking about the nature of scale in our project. So we ended up having a campaign in the city, which was called Participatory PokémonGO. It was in partnership with the city of Boston. Unfortunately, it also corresponded with an election, and so the mayor's involvement was downplayed because it directly corresponded with an upcoming election, and he didn't want to do it. So he sort of stepped away a little bit, but we ended up getting a fair amount of contributions. We asked for these 1-minute video testimonials, essentially, about why locations in the city are important to youth. And so we partnered with a number of organizations. Young people created these one-minute video proposals, submitted them to a site, and then they were voted on by people across the city. The amount of proposals we got wasn't as large as we were hoping, and so we started investigating that a little bit as to why this was why we were not getting as many 1-minute videos as possible as we were hoping. And one of the reasons why we think is that the people that we were having a hard time reaching were hard to reach. And so that we ended up shifting gears a little bit, and we shifted the project. We actually changed the name, and I'll explain that a little bit. We moved from Participatory PokémonGO to what we ended up calling XR Stories. And really what we were interested in is shifting the data layer of the city, and we changed the narrative around it as well. So when we started going out to local organizations that were working in these neighborhoods, they were less interested in motivating their youth to participate in a project around PokémonGO, and they were far more interested in giving youth a voice and changing in altering this data layer, altering all the data that people are accessing about those neighborhoods and making it more reflective of those communities. And so as soon as we started changing that narrative, we got a number of organizations signed on and said, we're really interested in this. We want to engage youth in this way. We partnered with local community-based organizations, and we also partnered with 826, which is a writing organization. And so what we ended up doing is holding a number of workshops with youth in the city where they focused on not only identifying locations that didn't exist, but looking at Pokestops that did exist and rewriting the descriptions of those Pokestops to accurately represent the importance of those locations. And up here up here, this is the Faces of Dudley, which is a mural in the Dudley Square neighborhood of Boston. And the original description of the Pokestop was BYCC Mural 1995. And this is an incredibly important mural for the neighborhood. And unfortunately, this is cut off and I can't read it. But this was written by the kids in this workshop. This is just one example of some of the Pokestops that were written by the kids local to the neighborhood, and then within the next 2 days submitted into the game. So there was this incredible reward for the young people that participated. And so what we set out to do at this scale in which we did it was to not just get people to play Pokemon Go, but how could we get them to engage in the kinds of data that exist about their communities through a platform like Pokemon Go. And then because of the scale, the magnitude of Pokemon Go, the importance of doing that work was really clear to the youth that participated. And so, moving forward, and I think we're going to talk about that in a bit, but I guess I'll just conclude by saying that the project, what really mattered to me as we thought about and reflected on what we did was the sorts of things that resonated with people in the specifically youth in the community was not the game itself, but the kinds of voice that they were able to have in the game.
Great. So hopefully that gives a quick, clarifying question.
Yeah. So for those who don't use Pokemon Go, no one can just go and just change the information or location. So how is it that you guys set things up so that what was submitted by the young people then became what was changed?
Did everyone hear that? The question was, how do we actually get stuff into the game, basically?
Niantic did that.
So this is, in some ways, we should also acknowledge, even though we're talking about what can cities do, there's some exclusive partnerships that happened here, and there's some questions about how did those partnerships scale. Niantic has talked a lot, and I think it's common in Silicon Valley to say, well, we'll have a form, there's an API, there's a system, but in practice, a lot of that has come down to the human level, and I think it's an open question about how that will play out. We're going to have a couple questions that we'll talk through as a group, and then we'll have a little bit more of a group conversation. But I think conversation is, for us, and I think it was similarly for Niantic, some of what we're interested in here is trying to understand what are the right questions to be asking about these kinds of projects, partly for the next game that comes out. How can cities be ready for when that comes along? How can they position games like this? One thing that's different about games like Pokemon Go is that they are tied to particular places. And in fact, our cities, the sense of place is something that is often cultivated in those cities. We also know that people's connection to their place is often predictive of how likely they are to be civically engaged and to do all sorts of things in their community. So there's a movement to try and build that sense of connection, that sense of belief that you can do something in your city and be connected to it. So I wanted just to ask each person to respond a little bit about how did the game help you deepen that sense of place or connection? Was there kind of a place-making aspect in what you're doing, or did that not come up? Anyone want to jump in there? Or go straight down?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, and again, our program is different in that an Open Streets program in San Jose is brand new. This is our fourth year operating, and so I think through Pokemon, I think it brought people out who, and one of the things that's a focus of Open Street is to get people to see neighborhoods they traditionally wouldn't. And so it's kind of what they call disguised social integration. And so through Open Streets and Pokemon, I think a lot of folks came to Japantown. Again, there's only 3 in America and one's in San Jose. A lot of San Joseans didn't even know Japantown existed because it's the 10th largest city in America. It's a sprawling urban city, and so people traditionally don't go from east side to west side and vice versa. So for us, it was placemaking 101. It was bringing people to public spaces that they traditionally wouldn't see in a new way, and that's walking or biking. And so it was a great experience for our city.
And as we pass along, let me just jump in with one person who's not here. The Philadelphia organizers, they saw what happened in San Jose. They said 30,000 people coming out to an event. They said, oh no, we do not want that many people, especially we do not want people traveling from like other states, traveling from Canada. There are people that traveled from other countries to the San Jose event. They said that is not the sense of place we want. This is not about tourists who get a sense of our place brand, but rather it's about locals who visit another neighborhood. And they said, is there anything we can do to optimize for that local kind of feel? And so you were talking about taking it from 10 down to 2.
And even the 2 brought people from Canada, 1 person from Great Britain, and a few people from Mexico. So even 2 is gonna bring them. And if you go to YouTube and just type in Viva Calle San Jose Pokemon, there's a gentleman who woke up at 3 in the morning and drove 8 hours from Southern California to Northern California to experience it. Very cool.
In the report, we actually contrast a little the San Jose case with the Philly case and how they took different actions to try and have a different feel in their experience. You can actually track that also in terms of the actual Pokestops. So we pressured Niantic for some of this data that's sometimes so hard to get. We said, we're not releasing this report unless you give us this data. We pushed them on a couple of things, and one of the things we could see is the boost in the number of people that went to each Pokestop compared to a weekend prior was much higher in San Jose than Philadelphia. So we can say that like on a per Pokestop basis, they were able to bring in people, still 10,000 people or so are what came to Philadelphia, but on a per stop basis, it was less, which is at least one way of making that comparison. Mm-hmm. All right, let's hear about any sense of place, either Boston?
Yeah, I want to talk about, so the idea of place that it's hard to locate this specifically to PokémonGO, although that was the vehicle. I think what's increasingly important, as I said this before, is this data layer. And what's interesting is that increasingly there's all sorts of data about every neighborhood in every city. Being able to access that data and actually contribute meaningfully to that data is where placemaking happens. So I'm actually interested in, and yes, there were walking tours, we did that as well as part of this project. But I think that what's most compelling to me is sort of exposing to young people that there is all this data about them that they think they have no control over, and what does it look like when we open up some of these doors to give some control over what this data looks like, or even to be exposed to the kinds of data that exists. And so with PokémonGO, we don't necessarily think about it as a database, but that's exactly what it is, and it's a pretty extraordinary one at that.
And it was motivating for the young people in your case. Yeah.
And in terms of Philadelphia, in our libraries, it was really remarkable how we created the maps, the community maps, identifying neighborhood assets. So each of the 5 maps had 5 or 6 community assets, and with some short descriptors that were created by us and by the librarians. And looking ahead, if we were to ever do this again, I think it'd be really interesting if we first engaged with the community and had them do the descriptors, kind of like your example in Boston, around the community assets and those that they think are most important to them, and how they resonate with them in their neighborhoods, and what the definitions of these assets are to those people, I think would be really interesting. But certainly our mapping project was a great example of this kind of hyper-local neighborhood asset mapping.
Yeah, and I think libraries are also such interesting institutions because they are often the primary civic institution in a neighborhood. So to anchor things there is a really interesting opportunity. We've heard from now a couple different cities, and I wanted to shift our conversation to think about the fan side, because in some ways local culture is also, I don't know if it's intention or it complements this global culture of Pokemon. Like let's not forget that part of why there were so many people here is because there are generations that grew up with PokémonGO. Oh, well, not PokémonGO, but Pokemon, and it became PokémonGO. And so how did fan culture appear in each of the cities you were in? Is this something that you were already engaging with? Did fans remix in some ways? We saw chalk art in Philadelphia, for instance. Anyone want to talk about the kind of fan culture side of it and how that came in or didn't?
Yeah, it came in a big way in San Jose. Some positive, some negative. One of the things that we were monitoring online was the rumor mill, and somebody created a rumor that a Farfetch'd was going to be released in Japantown, even though it didn't.
Can we just say, who knows what a Farfetch'd is? Show of hands. So that's about half the audience. Anybody want to explain why that's valuable? Yeah.
There's a few Pokemon
Absolutely, and sorry for not clarifying. And so it created a massive human traffic jam in Japantown. And so I was sharing with some of these folks the day of the event. I have an earpiece, and I only hear 3 people: public safety, police and fire, and my lead logistics person. I don't want to hear anything else. And all 3 of them were like, "We got a big problem in Japantown." Like, it was extraordinary. And again, people weren't getting violent. It was just a lot of people, and there's no way to get emergency vehicles through there. I'm kind of agoraphobic. I don't like crowds. I went down there. Remember, we're outdoors, and I was like, "Everybody get the hell out of here!" I'm just kidding. I didn't say that. But it did some amazing things. There are groups in San Jose. There's about 4 different major groups, and they coordinated battle raids. If you don't know what that is, kind of go into a place and try to capture one of the bigger Pokemon. So we had groups, gangs of people rolling through San Jose, going to different sites. In the report that Benjamin's referring to, one of the maps that you'll see in there is actually our map of Viva Calles that a fan took, and they just reworked it, and they showed folks where to meet up for different characters. And again, our server crashed. So big fan base in San Jose. It was great. Rumors don't help for public safety, but it was a pretty amazing day.
So in Philadelphia, in our libraries, we were engaged with the Pokemon game and platform across a month, so July to August. So unlike in San Jose, where it was this one-day event, and just kind of the waters break and all these crazy fans come and flood your streets, in Philadelphia, it was a slow trickle. So it was really hard to gauge the fan culture interaction because it was just like a constant drip in and around our libraries. With that said, the reason that the games were successful in our libraries were because the staff members who agreed to take a role in this pilot were gamers themselves and fanatics, and they really put their own touches on it and their own personal lens on it. And I think that's one of the reasons why this pilot was successful, was because they were so engaged with the game.
Yeah, I interviewed one who had a stuffed animal Pokemon that she brought out like for events, coloring books. I mean, librarians are doing a lot of this already with young people and the culture that they care about. So I think like for them, it was an opportunity to do even more. Of course, they said, "I can't wait till Harry Potter. That's really what I want to do." That ties to books in some way. So we'll see what happens with the Wizards Unite game that's planned. Did you want to add anything on that?
I mean, I guess I could say that the thing about teenagers is that they could be fickle, and it seemed like the teens that we were interacting with were not as motivated by Pokemon as we thought. They said that that was last summer, and that was interesting. So so that part of the reason that we switched gears was because we weren't able to rely on the fan culture as much as we thought we were going to be able to. And I think, and actually it was because of the rumors around Harry Potter, again, sort of new fan possibilities, that they thought, like, great, I'm gonna make an amendment to this data layer that's gonna be in the Harry Potter game. Now that's something.
Yeah. So maybe one last question. In terms of whether you might do this again, are there things that you're thinking about? Is this something you'd recommend to other cities? Is there something else you would want to know about what happened in your city? And then let's open it up. Anybody know that they're definitely doing something again with Pokemon Go fans? Yeah, similar. Will it be similar this next time?
We're gonna change it. Definitely, we learned a number of crucial lessons last year. Nothing. No one was hurt. We did have a number of public safety issues that we had to work through, so that we won't recreate the human traffic jam. So this year, we're going to partner with Niantic. We're going to have the game spawn in 2 large hubs. So we have Marshall Cottle Park, which is a 40-acre working farm park. So that's where we're gonna steer the people over there, so there's room they can spread out. They won't be on the route, kind of blocking traffic. And then our county fairgrounds, which is massive. So we're gonna make the spawn happen off the route, off to the side. Still get folks to traverse the route, but definitely want to keep the action away from the streets. And then this year we're going to be creating a call to social action. So San Jose, like many large cities in America, especially in California where it's warm and sunny most of the year, has a massive homeless population. And so it's very difficult. It's a tough situation to solve, whether, it doesn't matter which side of it you're on, it's a hard answer. It's a hard question to answer. And so we're going to be working with our housing department and 2 of our largest homeless serving nonprofits, and we're going to ask Pokemon players to bring things that homeless folks need, like socks and jackets and things of that nature, because we'll be doing it September 23rd this year, and that's kind of getting ready for California's winter. It's not like New York winter, but it's still, we want to help some folks out. So that's kind of how we're changing it up this year.
Our plans is to, what we've done is we've sort of codified the workshops that we've done, and so what we're most interested in doing is just making these workshops available for other organizations to pick up and use. So that's our next move, is to make it reproducible, not necessarily scalable.
And the library, the Knight Foundation recently invited us to apply to embed a fellow in the library for 6 months and think about ways to use either the Pokemon platform or the Ingress platform to deepen our community engagement initiatives. So we should be hearing about that soon. Hopefully we are one of the cities that are selected for this, and then stay tuned.
And I think one of the lessons that the report talks a little bit about is that a lot of cities, when they first did it, they said, we'll just call the Pokemon players, like we'll trumpet, they'll put a press release up. And that over time, though, one of the things we realized also in going and talking with them is that a lot of the player groups are incredibly networked. Like there's really dense social capital there, and that to ignore that and to just treat them as users is kind of like to ignore local organizations that have been building up some of those connections, have been self-moderating, including conversations on like cities and neighborhoods and whether a neighborhood is good to go to or bad to go to, whether that's a safe place, an unsafe place, whether those are stereotypes or healthy things. So whether civic discourse is happening in some of the fan groups already in interesting ways, and we should build on that directly in kind of a network-friendly way as opposed to working with individuals, I think is an interesting question, and it comes a lot back to how cities organize and engage. There's a lot of decisions and tactics that cities can draw on. All right, well that's kind of the conversation we had here to like lay some of the groundwork. Anyone want to ask a question of one of these cities? We have a number of people, yes.
I have questions. First, I'm so excited. This is like my jam, cities and games. So I work with a couple of organizations, and I'm usually always the first game designer that they've ever had as an artist in residence or something like that.
And what's your name?
Jessica.
Thank you.
So I'm curious about how to be an independent game designer and start to embed and work with cities to create infrastructure, to create original content in a way that is accessible and feels exciting and doable for cities, and not something that feels like you do that over there, and then if it totally takes off, we'll take it on, which seems really great that that's happening, but I think there's a lot of interstitial space to be making things together, and I would love to hear some thoughts on if and how that might happen in the future.
And while the panel's thinking on this, I will add that when I interviewed the CEO for Niantic, one of the things he said is, we kept trying to get cities to pay attention to us, and they wouldn't even meet with us. We went to like Chicago, and they're like, we'll meet with you, and then like their CTO actually like shuttle us off to like someone much less. So like Niantic, we think of them as this big important company. They couldn't get traction with city government. That's at least how they felt.
Yes. Yes, Jessica, absolutely. There's a space for partnerships, especially around, I didn't know San Jose was in the middle of Silicon Valley. I thought it was actually a place. It's just a region. And so as you can imagine, it's high-tech capital of the world. And so we partner with just about anybody who has a pretty decent grasp on something. Again, you sit down, people will pitch, all right, I got an idea. And you're like, whoa, that's not even anywhere near doable. But the whole gaming, when Niantic called, it was an instant yes for us. And so working with artists, working with designers is something that my department and the city of San Jose is very open to, because we have to make our cities more livable. You know, Gil Penalosa from 880 says your city should be built for an 8-year-old to an 80-year-old, and we embrace that in San Jose. So any type of forward thinking, especially around technology and innovation, is very welcome in our city. So
And
we're
what
big on
department
it.
are you in?
I'm with the Parks and Recreation Department.
And that might matter. Like the culture of the department could be part of what has that welcoming, and also the image that you're an innovation-friendly kind of city, which not all cities see that as what they're about.
Absolutely. It really does. You're exactly right, Benjamin. It is the culture, and our director, Angel Rios, on down, is very open to finding new ways to engage families and in all aspects of our population. And so we're like I said, we're always trying to be ahead of the curve of innovation and getting people into our, because we're Parks and Recreation, into our public spaces.
Anyone else want to jump? Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
I'm curious, you're unleashing this engagement, you're unleashing, like, showing up, which is always, like, the hardest part. It's like, will people just show up? And clearly they will. And so I wonder, like, now that you've unleashed this, like, how do you channel that into, like, participation in government? Like how does this, you've started something that has an implication to actually inform civic participation, transportation, homelessness, voting, so how do you, what are the next steps, I guess, is that towards something like that?
Well, I will first of all just say that's definitely a hard question that lots of people are trying for the answer, and that's one of the reasons I think it's exciting to have Knight keep asking that, because they frame that as what is that next step, without really knowing what it is. But ideas on answers? Anyone want to?
Well, as a non-government person on the panel, I would say that the goal isn't necessarily to get people to participate in government. That what we mean by civic participation is can be a number of things. It's about being connected to neighborhoods. It's about having an investment in community, and that doesn't necessarily mean participating in the mechanisms of government. And sometimes those are sometimes those things are at odds. And so I think we can think about these interventions as ways of building connections to each other and to place, and also as mechanisms of empowerment. And I think that as opposed to participation, we should be speaking about empowerment as the appropriate next step.
And I was going to say, and as a government employee, it does, I think, not disagreeing, but there is a great way to, I tell people this all the time. During the Open Streets program, the people who complain the most are people who own businesses. What? You're going to close down the street? How are people going to get to my business? They're going to walk. Well, that's crazy. I know it's crazy, but everyone does it everywhere. And so when we look at something like a parking space, I always tell people, how many parking spaces you got? I got 8. Well, you want 8 cars, or you want 130,000 people on a bicycle? Oh. And everyone on that bike has a wallet in their back pocket. Oh, now you're making sense. And so people are like, wow, that's amazing. It's the same thing. If you draw 35,000 people, what are you going to do with them? So right now in San Jose, there's a little bit of a tug of war. The mayor's office is like, yeah, what are you going to do with those 30,000 people that show up? I said, we're going to work some homeless stuff. He goes, well, that's a good idea. But we also have our volunteer corps for Beautify San Jose. We got to recruit 2,000 volunteers to help beautify our communities. So we're going to have tabling. So we're going to be able to recruit those people who are there to play Pokemon. But hey, take a look at what we got going on. Same thing with Viva Kai is when people say, hey, it's crazy, I can't believe you're going to close my streets. Businesses see a 50% uptake in their business a day because they're getting more customers who aren't flying by their storefront at 40 miles an hour, but they're rolling by at 3 miles an hour. So when you bring folks, when you build it, they will come. There's a lot of different ways to engage people, and it could be civic, it could be social, and it could be empowerment. Absolutely, they're there. So tap into them.
Cool. One surprise that happened in Philadelphia that I thought was a great story. The treasure hunt they had, one of the clues was no longer valid because the mural had been touched up, and the thing that they referred to in the mural was no longer there. And some players were showing up, and they were like, what's going on? How can I? And they started asking questions of like the nonprofit that happened to have a booth right there. And suddenly there was this conversation going on between players and the nonprofit. And the guy was like, I'm sorry, I'm really busy. I can't really talk to you right now, he says to me. He's like, I got to go answer all these questions, all these Pokemon players. They want to know things about. I'm like, that's what we wanted to have happen, right? And that we forget that we can even engineer that. In fact, I think there's ways of doing things like treasure hunts that intentionally leave out information that encourages conversation. session. So there's all sorts of kind of design that can happen at the content level that, with all respect to a lot of the cities and frankly to Niantic, they aren't thinking about this stuff as much. It's hard to do that kind of design, but I think that that's the kind of design we want for people to engage more deeply. How can we have conversations between organizations and individuals, or have them collaborate together in some way? Other questions? Yes?
Hi. I'm not a PokémonGO player, so the question is, what is the meaning that people see in the game, and how do you connect that to meaningful objects in physical space?
Yes. Well, first of all, I will just say that your question hints at one of the reasons why I feel like I've talked about PokémonGO with Games for Change community a bunch, and they're like, that's not a civic game. That's not about anything. That's just like Pokemon characters in there. It's like people totally don't see how it connects to cities. The irony being, of course, that lots of studies of like civic life and associational life in cities are around games like bowling, which are not about anything in it. Like bowling is not about content, right? Bowling is, but the leagues of bowling might get people mixing across race and class lines in really interesting ways. So I think if we're too literal, we're going to miss some of the opportunity here. And so I think I would at least say that that's one of the lessons of Pokemon Go. There are a lot of people that still don't get it because they're like, what's Pokemon Go at? It's about Pokemon characters. And I think that's not why it's important for cities for the most part. But I'll also turn it over to people on this panel. What kind of stories could we tell, or how does content come up in the game in ways that you would like to elevate?
I'd just say the game itself was not important for the library. It was rather how do we use the game as a platform to better engage with our communities, and also better engage within our libraries and try to attract new audiences. So yeah, Pokemon itself, it could be Pokemon, it could be Harry Potter, it could be bowling leagues in the library with like maps around. But I think you're right on with that point, that it's not the thing itself that is the vehicle, but rather how it brings people together.
Any last questions people wanted to get out? Yes.
One more. If somebody's organizing some sort of event for Pokemon or for Niantic itself, what kind of responsibility do they feel if something goes wrong by people playing the game?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, things go wrong. Big time. Yeah, it's insane. Adults acting like savages. So we made a mistake of having 5 Pokemon volunteers with Pokemon hats. And the whole idea was we want people to move throughout the route. So we had a giveaway, and we asked them to find the person with a Pokemon hat. Bad idea. So literally the police have to create like a safe zone because people were mobbing them. And so just something you wouldn't think of. You wouldn't think that people would mob somebody for a cheap giveaway, a wristband, whatever team you're on, and a poster. But people get heated about things like that. And so we did make a mistake. We underestimated the draw of Pokemon. So we weren't prepared for the numbers. So knowing what Ed Solis is telling you, take my information down, I'll tell you 50 things not to do. But the first thing, if you walk away and don't remember anything, remember this. If you engage people in Pokemon, they're going to show up to your city. They're going to come. Maybe not if you spread it out like our friends from Philadelphia, but a one-day event, you're definitely going to get a good draw. And remember, we had 10 days of marketing to get the word out, and we got 35,000 people. So with that many folks, you can make a lot of mistakes. You just got to be prepared for those kind of things.
I think that we can also push on companies like Niantic to say, give us some templates, give us some legal agreements where if we do something, we can be clear, don't blame Niantic, they're not responsible. On the other hand, we're just doing an event, don't sue us. You could have some of this kind of legal framework may be something that we need in cities. That we also could need some of the framework in terms of access to code or metrics. Like if a library is going to really invest in something, how are we going to be able to show success when you go back to our boards of directors and say, this was worth a bunch of staff hours? So should we ask them to provide us with aggregate stats? They're very sensitive about violating privacy with users and giving any type of personal data, of course. But aggregate data, they should be able to. And sometimes that's a conversation they're also a little scared because they're not in the habit of releasing some of this. So these are conversations that I think are bigger than this game that hopefully we start asking now so that cities have more capacity. If these kind of conversations are ones you'd like to continue, we're going to go out and grab some lunch at a restaurant that's like a 6-minute walk near here. We'll see if they have more spaces, but anyone that would like to join us is welcome. Or come up, and please do not mob, but respect the space around
I don't have any giveaways.
our speakers. Speaking of giveaways, we do have some in the report if anyone would like that. All of these fine folks are featured in the report. Anything last people want to add? Words on the way out? All right, well, let's give a round of applause to our speakers.